Hello again, everybody. This is Steve coming to you with another video on writing fundamentals. This is more in the area of world building. Uh, and as you see by the little boilerplate up there, you're like, this is about farming. I don't need to listen to this, and probably walk away. Hang on there a second. You know, if you've been on a farm, you know how a farm works. Yeah, you probably don't need this video. If you haven't been on a farm, or the most you've done is maybe gardening, you should probably sit down and listen to this, because I'm going to cover, I've discussed it in small detail through a number of my other videos, but in this one and this is going to be a series, and I'm going to be covering a lot of details about farming. And you're probably thinking, okay, I'm writing a book. Why is farming important? Well, under certain genres, this is going to be a major factor. Really, in one way or another, it's a major factor in pretty much every book, because anywhere you have a society, anywhere you have civilization, you're going to have farming. Doesn't matter where, what kind of, whether it's like, medieval or, Wild West or, science fiction. You're out in the stars, you're running around, and eating replicator rations and stuff like that. In some small way or part, you are going to have farmers involved. Now, the farming may take on different shapes in different environments and different storylines and stuff like that, but farming and food production is going to be a big thing in your world. Even if it's not a big thing on the front end, you're going to have a lot of it's going to have a major impact in the back end, because when people don't eat and people can't eat because there's no food, they get real grumpy and they start doing stupid things and bad things. And back in antiquity, that's how wars got started, because somebody didn't have enough to eat and suddenly you got two nations duking it out for resources. So anyhow, like I say, this series is going to be a bit more granular, because like I say, farming is a very important part of, especially like colonial stuff. Because farming, like when you talk about 1600s, 1700s, stuff like that, the colonies, they didn't have like England and France and all of them sending over shipments of food, and all they did was sit on their duff all day and twiddle their thumbs and fiddle and all that kind of stuff. No. These people, when they went there, they had to be self-sufficient. So if you're doing any kind of survival stuff, colonial stuff, even if you are, you're running a book about lawyers in downtown Detroit or San Francisco or something like that, these guys going out to eat, it's like, okay, we're going to have this, this seasoned chicken dinner with carrots and basically like a chicken dinner or something like that. You have to realize that chicken dinner didn't just show up. That chicken didn't just show up in that packaging. That had to have a source. Now, it may not be a major driving important thing in your book, but having this in the back of your mind will be important, because it can give you extra ideas. It can give you extra struggle and strife and challenges for your characters. Like I said, there's uses for this, even if it doesn't directly play into your main story. It would be part of your super world, the world from which you draw everything. Having this information will, like I say, it'll spawn ideas. It will help you flesh things out. You can make stuff more believable, more relatable. So, farming, basically, as much as people may not want to admit it or may not even realize it, farming runs the world. Without farmers, you don't eat. That's all there is to it, unless you go grow it yourself. And in today's world, it's not practical for everybody to be growing their own food. They probably should, to be completely honest, but they, they're not growing their own food. A lot of those skills are lost, so a lot of people don't even know how to plant a garden, let alone farm and raise livestock. And and that's some of the things I'm going to be covering, because you're going to have everything from the guy who plants a couple rows of carrots and has fresh carrots during during the season and that's it. All the way up to the guys who have the great big sweeping farms and fields. They've got the cattle and all that, because you're going to have to look at crops, animal husbandry, food storage. I touched on that a little bit, but I'm going to go into that more here in one of my videos. You have the seasons you have to work with. Because like you can't plant food in the winter, obviously. If you plant something in the summer, unless it's a short crop or a crop that actually should be planted later in the season, if you're starting to plant stuff in the summer, you're too late. Your stuff's gonna die before it matures. And you also have to differentiate things like, what is a food animal versus what is a work animal. Like, a cow. Well, the funny thing is some of them can actually be both. Like a cow can plow a field and you can have them for dinner. Horses, not so much unless they're the only thing you've got left. Horses, they're going to go out there and they're going to be your work animal. Oxen are kind of a dual mode animal. Goats, kind of, they don't like go out and plow fields and stuff, but they can cut down your lawn. You can milk them for milk, etc. like that. So you've got that. Birds like chickens, ducks, geese, etc. like that. Dealing with predators, dealing with butchery. I know any one of you that's a vegan is probably going to gross out at that, but that's part of the food process. I mean, even nature goes out there, although nature doesn't do the butchery part quite so nice as what humans do. But anyways, you're going to have hunting for survival. I've mentioned that before, and other things like that. There's a lot of things to consider with farming. Now, farming has different technological levels, different skill levels, different things that are involved. Like our ancient ancestors did everything by hand because they hadn't domesticated animals yet. They hadn't figured out how to harness them, how to put them to work. Basically, they were either you rode them, you milked them, or you ate them. There wasn't too many other things you had them doing. Once they figured out how to yoke the animals and put them to work and make them do stuff, then they became even more useful, which included plowing. Once they figured out plowing, they found the animals were very good for that because they would have tried to do it themselves and found out how tiring that was. But man, you strap a plow to a couple of horses and off you go, and the most you got to do is just keep that plow in the furrow. There's also machinery that over time, originally like in antiquity, you had to thresh wheat by hand, which means you went out there, you created your sheaf, you cut down your wheat, you created your sheaves. Of course, you had to create the tools to cut down the sheaves, or cut down the wheat to create the sheaves. And then, as time went along and we started getting closer to the like the 1800s and stuff, you started seeing machinery appear. Originally, it was horse powered. And then it became like steam powered and stuff like that. And that machinery was used to simplify the job, to simplify the work. And eventually, as technology improved and technology grew, you went from this and this to this big monstrosity. And, and then you had other things in between. But, like, this is what we have nowadays. If you look at shows like Star Trek Picard, they actually show a scene, I think in season 1 or 2, where Picard is sitting at his estate, and he's got these little floating machines that go along. They spot the clusters that are ripe, and they literally transport them off the vine and into this little vat. And they do all the labor work, and all he has to do is just basically slap a label on the bottle, and there's his wine. And they do all the rest of the work. So that's like the ultimate pinnacle of farming. And if you look at other sci-fis, there are examples where they they might come from a high-tech society, but they're relegated to very simple, archaic farming methods because they don't have the equipment or the knowledge or other things like that to employ high-end farming techniques. Like I said, though, looking at this here, they used to have to take the wheat, cut it down into sheaves. They'd take the hay and they would bale that, they would cut it down, let it dry, and then they had to actually they didn't even bale it. They just put it into a great big loose pile on saddle stones, and then they would thatch it to keep the rain off it so it didn't rot while it was sitting there, and then saddle stones kept the mice away. But then along came steam power, like you see here. That right there is a steam traction engine. It's not self-powered. All it does is it powers other pieces of equipment, like the device you see here. They're shoveling hay into it, and then it would take the hay and it would bundle it together and wrap it and spit out these ready-to-go hay bales. Which is where you get the square bales from. As these were the first ones that actually started taking that loose hay and putting it into something that you could easily stack in the loft. And then you had the really old style where it's horse and wagon, and you were doing a lot of labor-intensive stuff. Like clearing fields was very labor-intensive. That's one reason slavery was so popular. Is a lot of that work was something you could not get paid people to do, just because it was so hard and so messy and dirty and all that kind of stuff. So like I say, back in the olden days, human labor and animal labor were a big thing on the farms. Yields were also a lot lower because there was so much to do and it all had to be done by hand. So like this here, you got a one bottom plow, and just for those who don't know, a bottom is basically just one plow blade. So if you have a 3-bottom plow, you've got a plow with 3 blades on it. But you got 2. They look like Shire horses. A Shire horse is like they're like the Mack truck of horses. They're the big dudes. Clydesdales are a Shire horse. These were the diesel tractors of their day. And you had a guy back here, and he had the straps, and he used the straps to control these guys, drive them forward. They'd pull it through the ground. What it would do is it would take the ground, it would cut it open and flip it over to get air to it, and it would break the ground, make it easier for the plants that the seeds that they plant to take hold. You take the stuff that's on top, fold it under, and that creates green manure. It's got a lot of advantages, and like I say, it makes the soil. It also makes the soil softer. Makes so again the seeds are able to take root easier. Once you plowed a field, you would come back through with a similar device, but it was called a rake. And what that is that's just this it's similar to the plow, except you have this the single wheel. And you still have the 2 handles. You have the single wheel. And then you have like these kind of half circle fingers that go into the ground. Or you could have, there was other styles where it was basically just a great big platform, and then you had all of these little spikes that dug down into the ground. And what that does is that takes the rough ground coming from plowing and breaks it up smaller, and then you come in with discs, you come in with drags and other things like that, just to break that ground up to where it's as loose as possible and it's as small a pieces as possible. Like I say, it's to make it easier planting and for your crops to your seeds to take hold and grow and mature and be successful. And large crops aren't necessarily like, oh, I get to make extra money. No, it's, hey, we got extra to eat this year. Because when you're in this type of simplistic living, the more food you can produce, the better off you are. If you have a lean year, you're going to have a hungry winter. But if because you got to remember, you also have to feed your animals. So you got to keep them happy. And if you can't keep them happy, then you got a problem. Well, you got a problem both ways, actually. But now here's an interesting one. The Amish use this. This is something that's actually reasonably new. I say new in the sense that, these were around in the early 1800s. They were kind of the Cadillac. They were the Cadillac of farm equipment. What it is it's a horse-drawn plow. Has a little handle so you can raise it up, lower it down. You sit right here on this little spring seat. And these have anywhere from 1 to 2 to 3 bottoms on them. And yeah, it's kind of like a modern plow, except it's horse-drawn, and you sit on it. I've seen these go with as many as 3 bottoms and 4 horses. I feel bad for the horses, because the horses, unless it's like really loose ground, naturally loose, 4 bottoms and horses is working for their dinner, believe me. I've seen them before where they had 12 bottoms, but they also had a team of 25 horses. I don't have that picture. I saw it once, and I couldn't find it. But this thing is, this setup is just massive. This is, pre-tractor days. Funny thing is, this beginning of like the photographic period, so they didn't really have, most farmers were still horse-drawn plowing and stuff. Matter of fact, my grandpa Williams, he was plowing with horses up into the 1950s. There was a lot of people plowing with horses up into the 1950s. Now, the funny part was when World War II got over, there was a lot of surplus Army Jeeps. And the people who recycled those out to the farmers, because the farmers loved them, they were cheap. They were powerful, you didn't have to run with animals. And they figured out how to put a harness on the thing, or on the back end of it, so that you could run like a 2 or a 3 bottom plow. And you're running up and down the field with this Army-issued Jeep that was surplus by the end of World War II. And you're plowing your field. You take your horses and you send them down the road to the Amish who are still plowing by hand, or to the glue factory, or to wherever they would end up going. Like if they were really old, you just send them to the glue factory. And that's a whole other animal. I won't touch that one. No pun intended. But yeah, this is like I say, a really neat way to plow if you're on a horse-drawn. I can't say it's a lazy man's way. It's the work smarter, not harder thing. So this one here looks like it has just 2 bottoms on it, which is, given the fact you've only got 2 horses, that's going to be a heck of a lot of work. If it's only 1 bottom, then hey, good for the horses, because you're not overworking the horses. But this is another one that's similar. This is just a single bottom plow with a single horse. Single horse can put, 1 horse per bottom will typically work with a setup. I don't always recommend it, because you don't want to wear out your horses or overwork them. So, because you got to remember, they're not machines. They can't go like 24/7, 365. They have to go for a few hours and then rest, and go for a few hours and rest. And you got to feed them. You got to take care of them. If they get sick, they have babies, etc. You got all that stuff to deal with, and the animal husbandry and stuff like that. So, this is something from the Middle Ages, and it pretty much describes what harvest season was like. As you notice, this poor guy over here is just so worn out, he's fallen asleep on the sheave. This dude just fell asleep on the ground. You've got other people having dinner. They're eating bread and porridge, which was pretty much what most of them ate. But yeah, they would take they had sickles and scythes, and they would cut the wheat, and they would put it into these sheaves, and they would put the sheaves into the barn. They would stack them up. And then what you did was you took a... now this is funny, because I like word entomology. What they would do when they were ready to take the wheat off the heads is they would use a tribulum, which is where we get tribulation. And they would take this thing. It was funny. It was like a gigantic nunchucks, because they had like a stick on one end, a stick on the other, and a chain or a rope in the middle, and you literally just went and you just beat on this wheat, and all of the the heads would fall apart, and they would fall on the ground, and then you'd sweep that up, put that into like a wicker, a concave wicker basket, and you'd go outside where it was windy, like on a hilltop or something, and you would shake it, throw it up in the air, shake it, throw it up in the air, and the idea was it would break the chaff off of the wheat kernel, and the chaff being as light as it was, the wind would blow it away, and the kernels would come down. Eventually, you'd have ready to use wheat kernels, and then of course, throw those in a stone grinding wheel, and boom, you got flour. So, but yeah, if you look at this here, there's a lot of people involved with bringing in a field, and that was one of the things. That was a good way for people who weren't farmers to make money, was harvest time. Because you're out there, you're working your butt off, but you're going to get paid good, and you might get to go home with some of the wheat too, which would, that might be your pay from a particular farmer. Is, hey, you just brought in a wheat field, I'll give you 2 bushels of wheat for you to take home and have for the winter. Like, yay, let's go do another field. And believe me, 2 bushels of wheat, it may sound like a lot, but it's actually not. You can go through 2 bushels of wheat pretty quickly. Here's an example of collecting hay before they had the balers and the big baling machines. Nowadays they just do gigantic round bales and square bales, and they've got the plastic, the thing that automatically plastic wraps them and stuff. They're really cool. You should research them. Yeah, and yes, I'm a farm and tractor nerd, as you can tell. But like nowadays, like I say, everything's automated. You have GPS. You have these machines that pick up the hay and they form them into square bales or round bales, and they wrap them up and they give them like weather protection and stuff like that. Back in the day, this is how you collected hay. You went out, the hay field grew up. You went out with a couple of guys, a couple of big broody guys. Give them all a bunch of scythes, so big, those big like Grim Reaper looking thing. It's that great big Grim Reaper looking thing. You just go out there and you should watch people that use them. Go up on YouTube and watch it, because there's an actual style to doing that. It's really cool. It's not just go out and hack on some grass as you're walking through the field. There's this rhythm that you follow, and the idea behind this rhythm and the way you do it. It takes practice to get it right, but what they've done is over time they learned how to take those scythes and follow this rhythm. And it keeps you from getting tired, because you're having to swing this thing for hours and hours and hours. So the system that they came up with, this kind of, it's almost like ballet in a wheat field, if you will, or in a hay field. And it's really neat, because you can sit there for hours using this method and do a whole field and not get tired. You might be a little tired by the time you're done, but compared to what it would be if you tried to just, go out there and brute force your way through the field, And those blades, too, they kept them blades sharp. You might go, 30, 40, 50 feet, stop, everybody goes over there and hone that blade, put an edge on it again, and then back through the field again. And then you'd leave it out there for a couple of days in the sun to dry. And you'd follow it up with a cart like this, minus a dog on top. Take a cart like this, and you'd go out there and you'd have this little pitchfork, and you'd fling it up on top, and because they didn't like windrow it like they do nowadays. Because the reason they windrow it nowadays is because it works best when you're dealing with the baling machines. If you have a nice tight row, it makes it easier to go across the field. You're using less fuel. You're taking less time, so a couple extra steps going across that field and creating windrows after you've cut it down. Because what you'll do is you'll cut it first, and usually use something like a brush hog. You'll cut it down first, let it dry, then you come back in with a windrowing machine, and this is basically just driving up and down the field. And a windrower brings all of that hay into a single pile, and the dried hay, and you come back with a baler and you run up and down those little rows. And bingo, you've got hay bales ready for your cattle and other stuff like that. Here's another example of a classic one-man plow, 2-horse team, single bottom. And the ground here looks a little rocky, but as far as soil quality, it looks pretty decent. Looks like it'd be pretty. Looks like even though he's he hasn't raked it or disked it or anything like that, it's folding over actually really nicely. He should, given how nice that is, he shouldn't really have to do too much more other than just, either disk it or drag it to get the perfect consistency he needs for for the field. And I will mention one thing about this. Where he's at, he's going to have a well-drained field. And by that I'm talking about like when the rain comes in, it soaks into the soil. You don't want that rain just sitting there. You want it to either percolate into the ground or drain off some other way so that the ground keeps a nice consistent moisture, but you're not too moist. But you also don't want it to be too porous to where it's too dry. The colonists that came in like to Virginia and stuff like that, they found that out the hard way, because like up in there on the Virginia coast, when you had some of those early colonies, the colonists starved because they didn't realize that what they were planting in was this really sandy soil, and the local natives had figured it out that when you go in there and you plant your field, you would like you take like a little river fish or a little piece of river fish. If it was like a big fish, you'd cut it up into little pieces, but you'd put your like if you were planting corn or maize, you would dig the hole, you put the fish in there, you put the seed on top, cover it over, and that gave the plant the extra nutrition it needed to grow up and become strong. And once it got big enough, then the soil was sufficient to keep it going. But it was that extra little bit of fishy fertilizer that got it going. And the natives there, the Native Americans, they had some amazing crops. I mean, if you look back on history, the colonists there were just jealous of how amazing their crops were, given how poor the soil was. And it was because of little tricks like that. So here's another example of farming. This one here is it's a single bottom, but you've got four head of oxen on top of it plowing it, which tells me the ground is probably a little hard, so you're needing the extra horsepower to get the plow through there. I don't think this is a two bottom, because this is a log plow. Basically what it is they just take a piece of tree limb and slap a steel blade into it, and down the field they go. It's kind of a real primitive one-man plow, but it works, does the job. Some of them were actually, the blades were wood, which meant that you also had to have a really strong wood, and that wood would wear out. You might change the blade 2 or 3 times while you're plowing a field. So nowadays, though, like that big tractor I showed you where you were going out and you were plowing and stuff like that and planting, well, this is the big beastie that you use nowadays when you go out to harvest your crops. And one interesting thing about this that's recent within the last 20 years is the transition from tires on the front and the back to tracks, either front or front and back. The reason being is you're less likely to get stuck, because I'll tell you this much from experience. If you're out there in the field and it's fall, now this is hay harvest. They're harvesting, or not harvesting hay, they're harvesting wheat. So you're not likely to get a muddy, wet field. But you're not gonna like have one type of tractor for harvesting wheat and another type of tractor for harvesting corn and beans. You're gonna have one tractor and it's gonna have multiple heads. The only time you change the combine is like if it's something that will not work with a normal thresher like this. Like one of the running jokes when it comes to switching from harvesting wheat to harvesting cotton is you don't change the head on the combine, you change the whole bloody combine. And the combine that they have for cotton looks like a combine and a hay baler had a kid. Seriously, go look them up. They're really interesting. At cotton combines, like I said, they're big, they're chubby. Like I say, they look like a hay baler and a combine had a kid. So otherwise, like with these for the primary crops that you're going to run into, even like rapeseed. What's some of the other ones? You're going to have, because I know in Michigan it's primarily wheat, beans, and corn, or oats, and those are all going to use this type of head. Wheat and oats use the same head, the threshing head like what they got here. Corn's going to use the one that's got the little pointy fingers that come out the front. Yeah, I'm sure you've seen them in advertising and stuff like that. Little pointy fingers, they go between the rows and they suck the corn in and harvest it. And then beans has a head similar to wheat, but it's different. because you harvest the beans differently. Like I say, it's a similar head, but it's still a head that's just for beans. But like I say, when it comes to harvesting your wheat, when you harvest your wheat and oats, you're harvesting that in like July. August at the absolute latest, July usually. Because you're going to plant it the year before, and you'll plant it in the fall after everything's, the leaves have fallen and the snow's not flying yet. You'll go out there and you'll plant your wheat and you'll plant your oats. Come spring, they germinate because they can winter over like that. Because usually what they'll do is they will sprout a little bit in the fall, and then they're resistant to the frost and cold and stuff like that. So they'll winter over just fine. Spring comes and gets warm enough, that wheat and oats just takes right off, and then you harvest it in July. Corn and beans. Beans you harvest in October. Corn usually in November. By October and November, now really though in October you don't want things really wet, because wet fields and bean harvesting, that really doesn't go together well. You want that to be dry, but once you get into the corn harvesting, it's, you're going to be having to fight the weather because it's going to rain a lot. It might snow. I've had it before where we just, the local farmers just barely got the beans out of the field, and then it snowed and it snowed and it snowed, and the corn was still in the fields, and they weren't able, it did not stop snowing until February. And that was as soon as the farmers could get out there and bring the corn in, because the weather just didn't allow it, which is something you've got to consider too with your with any of the farming stuff you write about. And I was mentioning that too, is the fact that you're dealing with weather and the seasons. And I'll cover that in more detail in another video, but you're going to be out there fighting the weather. Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. I mean, even with hay harvest and stuff, you're going to be fighting the weather because if it's a really rainy year, you need about a 3-day window of dryness to bring in a proper hay harvest. Otherwise, if it rains on the hay before you can get it in, it loses nutrients, and you end up with substandard food for your cattle and your major farm animals, your horses, stuff like that. And then if you got a dry year, your stuff may not germinate. I mean, I know of a number of years back, and it's happened on and off throughout history, but in the last 20 years, I know of a number of situations where it was so dry, it was up into August, and the crops hadn't even germinated. It was that dry. We had, in Michigan, humidity levels of 11%. That's desert humidity. That's how dry it was that year. The crops were crap. Because, the only people that were getting anything out were the people that had irrigation, and there wasn't that many of them at the time. So we had a really bad harvest that year. And then there's other years where it rains so much the crops rot in the field, because you either can't get them out, or they're so wet they drown. So there's those foibles, and I'm telling you this stuff because this is stuff you've got to think about and consider for your books. Depending on how much you actually include the farming stuff in there, this is things you've got to consider. But yeah, these big boys right here, these things are big enough that they can eat your car. I kid you not, they're that big. These things are like 16, 20, 25 rows. I think 20. No, there's one of them out there, a combine, I think they said does 42 rows. That's a big son of a gun. That's the kind that you literally take the head off the combine. The combine goes down the road by itself, and the head comes along behind him, being towed by a pickup truck. So that's vertical to the or parallel to the road. So that's how big some of these things are, and that's really nowadays it's the only way you can economically farm. But as I was saying though, with the tracks like this, you get up into October, especially late October, early November, and you start getting all that rain. Your fields will turn to mud, because you got all you've got is dead corn and dead beans and stuff, and you've got nothing really to hold the soil, and the soil's soaking up all this rain, and it's cold, and you're going to start having problems. you're going to start having problems actually getting traction in the field. That's why they went to this. And this isn't just like a muck farming thing. Like if you're for muck farming, you're typically going to have things like onions, potatoes, stuff like that are going to be on the muck farms. On those, they're going to have front and back because the tracks are the only way you're getting through the field. I've actually seen it on muck farms where the field was so wet, which is what you want for that crop. For those particular crops that need those muck fields, it was so wet in that field, they took a bulldozer out and got into a really wet section, got the bulldozer stuck. The guy abandoned the bulldozer, and the bulldozer literally sank into the ground, like all the way past the top of the cab. They had to come in during the dry season a year later and dig this thing out. That's how wet that ground was. So, anyways, yeah, here's another view of it. This one looks like it would be probably a 16-row head. So big heads, And this one though isn't quite as big as this one. This is a big boy here. This one's probably more medium grade because if you notice the bin up top compared to this bin, the bins are the same size, but if you notice, it looks a lot smaller here than it does here. Same size bins, which means this is a lot smaller. You can see that the cab's more prominent. This one, the cab's real tiny. You got quite a ladder to climb up to it. So different sized ones for different needs and stuff. This one's taking in wheat. So where's that oats? No, that's wheat. Okay. Another thing you'll have to look at is, like hay storage. Like this is the old way of doing hay storage. This would be these grains here. These are silos. What you would used to do is you would bring in your crop, like if you brought in corn or beans or something, and most of it went to the silos, and the silos bought it off of you as fast as it came in, and then you would take a certain amount of what you brought in, and it was usually the first stuff out of the field because you didn't know how much you were getting. So what you did was you would come over and you would fill these up, and these were your seed grain. This was your seed for the following year. Your seed corn, your seed beans, your seed oats, etc., like that for the following year. Once those were full, then the rest went to the silos. And usually these each year you would pretty much empty them out. And if you had a bad year and you lost most of your crop, you had to go buy in seed. Just one of the facts of being a farmer. This here is old-fashioned hip roof barn. You don't see these as much anymore, but this was how you stored your hay. You housed animals in them, like your animals would be down here on the bottom, your cattle, your goats, your sheep, whatever. You'd graze them back here. You'd bring them in here for the night. You would have hay up here for them, and you could basically just go up into the loft, throw down a couple bales. They were good to go. That was back when you had square bales. This is the round bales. This one you have a special tractor with a long pointy spike, and you hook those and run them out and drop them in the field for the cattle. There's a lot more to that, but I'm giving that to you so you can go research that. And going back to like medieval times, the stuff like this and harvesting. You got to consider, depending on the technological level. Like if you're doing hard fantasy, you're going to be looking at medieval level farming. So you got to look at what are the tools. Be a lot of hand tools. What are the tools? What are the techniques? How are they going to harvest it? How are they going to plant it? How are they going to take care of it, etc., like that. If you're doing like 1950s, 1960s, you can have these old Olivers. That one's an Oliver. You can tell by the kind of the rib cage radiator. That one looks like an Oliver. You got the old-fashioned pickup truck. This could be 1930s too, because it's got the old-fashioned harvestor type silos. These went out of fashion because they were actually very dangerous to work around. Because if your stuff got stuck up there and you tried to dislodge it and everything let go all at once, you're dead. That stuff is just going to come down and pancake you, and if it doesn't pancake you, has a very good chance of blowing out the bottom of the silo, and the silo drops on you and you're dead. So they were big for a while, and then they went to this type, which is a lot safer. The shorter, wider silos, especially like the really, really big, wide silos. Here's people in the field gleaning. In antiquity, there were certain groups, certain nations and economies and stuff like that, where gleaning was how poor people got their stuff. Because when the guys were coming through and they were taking the wheat out of the field and stuff, they weren't going to get everything. They might be told to go get everything, but usually they were told to leave the gleanings, not the gleanings, the extra residuals. Told them to leave it in the field, and the poor people, that was kind of the welfare of the time period. You go around, take you about 2 weeks of collecting, and you could have enough for 1 year. So here's another example of sheaves, and the straw was very valuable in bedding for animals. So they would come in, they would grab the wheat, put it on the wagons, take it back, store it, and then as they threshed the wheat, they would take the straw and send it over to the animals. But again, everything's very manual. This is a little exaggerated. This is a Middle Ages example of them going out and harvesting, I'm guessing, some kind of squash. But again, very manual labor. Throw it into baskets, carry it into the house. This one is pumpkins, if I'm not mistaken. Again, little tip carts. You got your horses, things around. You got you got a little village over here, and all these farms, all these dozens and dozens and dozens of fields are needed to feed that one little village. So now some of it they might sell out of the area, but majority of it usually stayed local to feed the people that were there. This is an old Western style. You've got you got the barn, and then you got these are big in certain areas that are very rural because it's a windmill pump. I've talked about them in my my mechanical puzzle videos. Windmill pumps are a godsend when you're off grid and you don't have electricity and you need to pump water, because if you need to water your cattle and you've got 100 head of cattle or 200 or 300 or something like that, you don't want to be out there hand pumping that. Believe me, you do not want to be in that. And if you've got plenty of wind in the area like you would here, you let that thing do its job. It pumps the water out of the ground for you, puts it into a trough. The animals dive into the trough and drink their fill. So it's little inventions like this. This is more something that came about late 1700s, early 1800s, if I remember correctly. So it's a more modern piece of technology, but believe me, compared to having to do it by hand, it is just a godsend. And this is another thing too when it comes to the farming, is the little personal gardens. Those are a big thing, but also so is the buildings. Like you see this one here. This one's got, it's got the thatched roof, but it's also got the hay up in the roof. I'm not sure if that's a barn for animals, but given the hay up top, I'm assuming so. You'll want to, time period specific or situationally specific. You'll want to research what kind of buildings that they would have had for storage, for food. Like this one looks like one of the food storage buildings where they would literally put this thing up on stilts with or up on like saddle stones. Go research that. Basically, they're little stones carved into like a mushroom shape. Keeps mice out. Keeps mice, keeps predators, keeps other things out of your food supply, so so the local animals don't eat you out of house and home over the winter. They would have had those. They would have had the various shelters and stuff like that. So yeah, that's the last one. So sorry for running everybody so long on this one, but there's a lot of info I wanted to give out to you guys. And the funny thing is, this is the intro. This is this is where we start from. And that, so that'll give you an idea of just how much information you need, for, if farming is to play any part in any of your books. And like I say, farming may not play a front and center role in your book, but it will play some kind of role. So always be aware of that. Because, like I say, people got to eat. Doesn't matter if it's, 200 or 2000 BC, or the 2600s AD, or the 30,000s AD. People got to eat. Doesn't, as long as you're a living, breathing human being, you and animals and everybody else got to eat. Eat, sleep, breathe, and all the other fun stuff. So, anyways, I will leave it at that, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Not sure what we're going to cover first, but it'll probably be, I think I'm going to cover crops, but we'll see. Then that one's probably, hopefully not going to end up as a 45-minute video like this one, but there's going to be a lot to talk about. So, anyways, I'll see you guys in the next video, and thank you for listening.